The design, development, and deployment of AI systems must adhere to an inclusive, responsible AI approach, addressing bias, user privacy concerns, and identifying underrepresented populations ensures that AI systems treat individuals equitably, regardless of their background, gender, or ethnicity, and will promote transparency, accountability, and trust in AI technologies. This session is particularly significant as it is aligned to one of GPAI's core priority areas, which is responsible AI. We have an esteemed set of panelists from multilateral organizations, industries, and governments who will be sharing their insights on how we can collectively align efforts to build a robust and equitable future for AI innovation ecosystem. May I first request Ms. Gabriela Ramos to join us on the podium. Ms. Gabriela Ramos is the Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO, where she oversees the institution's contributions to building inclusive societies. Her mandate includes tackling economic inequalities of income and opportunity and promoting social inclusion and gender equality. She has overseen the development and adoption of the first global instrument to promote the ethics of artificial intelligence, adopted by acclamation in 2021 by UNESCO's General Conference. Previously, Ms. Ramos worked as a Cabinet Director and Sherpa for G20, G7, APEC at the OECD, contributing to increasing the OECD's global impact and leading key initiatives such as inclusive growth, new approaches to economic challenges, climate change and growth, the gender equality strategy, and work on well-being in children. Ms. Ramos, you're requested to join us on the podium to deliver your keynote address.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to open this conversation, and it's a real pleasure because, as you know, the UNESCO has managed to get 194 countries to agree on a way to frame these technologies or the development of artificial intelligence ethically, and therefore the kind of reflections that we are going to have today in terms of how do we ensure that the technologies first in itself are more inclusive, are more reaching out to all the groups, but also how the technologies can help us to address some of the greatest challenges that we're facing. And what we say at UNESCO is that usually this is not a technological discussion, it has to be a societal one, because these technologies don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a context in which we need to solve some societal issues. If you think about it, and we have seen the reports of the IMF and many other economic institutions, the distribution of income, opportunities, outcomes are completely unequal in the world. Even inside countries, we know that wealth is accrued by the top, 60% of wealth is accrued by the top 10% income earners. We know that access to quality education, quality health, quality infrastructure, quality housing depends on where you're born. Many times depends on the cultural group you belong to, the socioeconomic status. And therefore, we should think about this technological revolution in the context in which we are. And the real question is whether these technologies are helping us to address those issues or not. I was in COP28. Today, there seems to be an outcome. I don't know if we are going to phase out or phase in, or what are we going to do with the fossil fuels. But at the end, there's going to be an outcome. Again, are these technologies helping us to achieve the climate transition, or are they just adding up to the complications that we are perceiving in terms of their consumption of energy, in terms of their consumption of water, in terms of the waste, all of the rare earth issues that we know go into the development of the tools. So this is the framing, and I think that's the conversation that we need to have. And then if you move to the technologies themselves, to the sector, and how these have been developed, we find patterns that we need to address. Because when we think about, when we are in India, actually, when we are in GPAI, and when we are with all of you and with the industry, it seems that it's everywhere, no? Technologies is everywhere, it's dominating our life, it's changing the way we work, it's changing the way we connect, it's changing. And we forget that half of the world does not have access to stable internet services, half of the world. Therefore, there's something that we need to be doing in terms of access. We see the figures, no? There has been a 20-fold increase in investments in these technologies, in financing startups, venture capital. The financial sector is rewarding firms in this area massively. But again, from those investments in the last years, 80% are in the US and China. And these are the main developers. And when you think about this, and I know that we have many people here that are dealing with these technological developments, you really need high-level skills. And these are, even in major economies, you saw the executive order of President Biden, one of the elements is attracting talent. Because even in the most advanced economies, there is not enough skills to really nurture and advance and deploy these technologies in the way that is necessary. Let alone those that are just lagging behind. And then the question that is dear to my heart, and I have here Joanna Berson, who is in the Women for Ethical AI of UNESCO. Women, no? One of the issues is gender equality. And again, I was shocked because I have been dealing with gender equality for quite some time in my career. And we're trying to close gender gaps, no, of wages, of labor for participation, of representation in companies. And then you look at the sector and it's even more skewed because you only have 22% of the labor force are composed by women. Women are even less represented in ITC disciplines than they are in STEM. And they are less represented in the management of these technologies as they are in the Forbes 500s. So this is the context, and we should not forget it, because at the end, if we really want to maximize the benefits of these technologies, first we need to fix the business model. I think this is beyond the question of risk, beyond the questions of hallucinations, beyond the questions of whether the data set is representative or not. We need to fix the way the business model has been evolving in a way that delivers these unequal outcomes or unequal sources of the unequal outcomes. And then we need to move from this to the real narrative, which is how do we create an ecosystem of incentives, economics incentives, for these technologies to dedicate more efforts to address the challenges we confront, to go for the kids that don't have access to education services, to go for the health. We know how much they can benefit health system, but again, not reaching out to those that are in most need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it? And I think that the narrative is changing. Actually, when generative AI erupted, everybody was saying, my God, these are so great risks, so great uncertainties, so great unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. But I think it was a blessing in disguise. And I'm here with David Leslie from the Alan Turing, with whom we have been working for quite some time. A blessing in disguise because we cannot ignore anymore. We cannot just think about this sector is going to balance itself, markets balance themselves, they don't. They need to have very strict ethical guardrails. They need to have very, very, I would not say this question about innovation or regulation and all these narratives is not the case. You go to any economic sector, all the economic sectors are framed legally, ethically, regulatory, incentive-wise, and therefore this is the call. And at UNESCO, we developed this recommendation on the ethics of the AI with this in mind. First, let's try to get these technologies to deliver for human rights, human dignity, sustainability, fairness, etc. Second, let's ensure that we bring those values into very concrete outcome-led principles, which is the transparency, the accountability, the rule of law. How do we ensure that whenever there is harm from these technologies, we have redressal mechanisms that are clear? Third, turn that into policies, because policies here is the missing elements in all these conversations, because at the end, these policies that you will manage to deliver the frameworks that we are looking after. If you think about it, public procurement is 12% of GDP in our economies. In some countries it's 18, in some countries it's, but it's a huge amount of money. What about government saying, I'm not gonna hire any service of any platform that does not abide to these ethical or very clear compliance rules on these elements? You turn the conversation. You turn the conversation when the governments make the investments that are necessary on the skills, investments in the access, investment in the, and producing these incentives to move forward. So this is what we're doing now. We have these policies. We address policies of related to data governance. How do we change the way we govern data? Why data needs to be owned by those that are able to raise it or to gather it? Why don't we have more access? Of course, we are now in the discussion of open source, and it seems that open source is going to solve everything. I think that we have many competing AIs. One thing is generative, but the other AI is also there with this question of data, the question that we cannot even erase a footprint, we cannot own it, and the recommendation is saying, sorry, but the data needs to be owned by the subject that is the source of. The question of human determination, we always said also these computers are producing things that not even the developers understand. Sorry, there should be somebody accountable, and as we always said, we're not going to blame it on the algorithm. So at the end is how do we develop this accountability? And what we did was not just to get into these very important reflections, but to say, okay, if we want human determination, let's all agree that we are not going to grant legal personality to these developments. Easy, straightforward. So there are rules and issues that we can really move forward and try to address. One of the questions, for example, is why don't we straightforward ban some of the misuses of these technologies? Why don't we ban the question of mass surveillance and social scoring? It's in the recommendation. So these are the kind of issues. Why don't we assess the impact, environmental impact of the technologies? Again, it's in the recommendation. But now we are working with member states, with GPAI, with India, and I really want to thank the government of India for their engagement, because we work a lot on the G20 presidency. We are now producing assessments of member states. We produce the readiness assessment. We're working with 50 states, 50 countries, all walks of life, from the Netherlands to India, Brazil, and then Malawi and Tanzania. And we're doing these diagnostics to know where countries are in all of the areas, cultural, social, infrastructure, and then to see how much we can build with them these ethical frameworks. We invite you to join us in the Global Forum on the Ethics of AI that is going to take place in Slovenia. It's the second edition in February, early February. And there we're going to come with this catalytic power that I think UNESCO is playing in terms of moving these things around. But now we don't feel alone. I have to say that 2 years ago we felt alone when we were going out and saying ethics, ethics, ethics. I think that President Biden agrees with us with the executive order. I think the EU agrees with us with the AI Act. And I think that the conversation is moving into not how do we stop the technologies, because we should not stop them. I think that we should, on the contrary, move more investments. How do we frame them to help us address the issues that I referred to? So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for a very insightful presentation and highlighting how the issues of ethics have gained relevance now, especially after generative AI and the recent AI advancements. Now I invite Professor Sood to join us on the panel and also deliver his keynote remarks on how we should be mitigating social risks. Professor Ajay Kumar Sood is the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, and he is also the Chairperson of Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council. Professor Sood is also a National Science Chair Professor at the IISc, Bangalore. He was a member of the Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council from 2018 to March 2020, and from 2009 to 2014. He had served as a member of the Scientific Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. Professor Sood has a doctorate in physics from IISc Bangalore. His research interests include the physics of quantum materials, soft and active matter. He has published more than 450 papers in peer-reviewed journals and holds several patents. Professor Sood, over to you.
Thank you very much for having me here. Let me start this discussion by saying the most obvious, that the rise of generative AI marks a paradigm shift. I don't think anyone in the room or outside the room will disagree. So while technology, we all know, has historically facilitated progress, the self-evolving nature of AI demands unprecedented caution necessitating an approach, one that balances the potential for extraordinary risks, benefits, and the extraordinary benefits with the inherent risk. So we have to bring this balance. Unleashing the full potential of AI requires a commitment, as was mentioned a few minutes before, to responsible development and deployment for a safer society. Now, what are the social risks and challenges imposed by AI? We all know that this social risk due to AI, they lie beyond accidental occurrences or unintended behaviors, system malfunctions, potential loss of traditional jobs, erosion of existing work and workplaces, etc. We all know that historically, major technological leaps often end up creating more jobs, better jobs, and much faster economic growth in the long run, which has substantially reduced human poverty and deprivation, as we have seen. So hence these transitional challenges are not center of my concern today. My concern really lies into the long-term social risks and direct adverse effects stemming from the extensive use of totally unregulated AI in non-military civilian context. Now, here the primary concern, if you see, is bias of various types, which you all know. It includes human bias, it includes the biases in algorithm, which have the potential to perpetuate and magnify existing societal biases with critical systems, impacting areas like criminal justice, hiring practices, loan approvals, profiling, etc. Now, when such AI tools become deeply ingrained in decision-making processes, it could lead to unjust and discriminatory outcomes. The bias present in training data, we all know, it has been discussed many times since yesterday and even before. It is worrisome, and because many of the AI systems operate as black boxes and there is a lack of transparency. Then it is known that AI holds the capability to influence and control social behavior through methods like targeted advertising, propaganda, social media manipulation, and surveillance. This poses concern about the erosion of democratic values and individual freedom due to AI's potential manipulation. As was mentioned by our Honorable Prime Minister yesterday, the dangerous outcome of deep fakes cannot be overemphasized. Now, what are the mitigating strategies for a resilient society? So let's look at some of them. So the Indian government completely understands AI-induced social risks and requirement of placing light touch regulation in place to avoid creating roadblocks for technological innovation. Here the key word is the light touch. It should not be overtly possessive of the regulation. Since beginning, Government of India has a vision of using AI for social development and inclusive growth of all. In 2018, Niti Aayog released the National Strategy for AI, which focused on fostering AI development in specific sectors such as healthcare, education, agriculture, banking, etc., in the spirit of using AI for benefit of all citizens. This strategy laid the foundation for further advancement in utilizing the applications of AI. However, this document did not directly put forth AI regulations. In 2021, a draft for responsible AI was introduced. I'm sure some of you would have looked at it, featuring voluntary guidelines that prioritize ethical AI practices. These guidelines underscored the importance of transparency, accountability, and fairness. While enforceable regulations were absent in this document, the emphasis on ethical consideration was a significant step forward. Indian government is committed to embedding the principles of responsible AI for all into its strategies. Our approach rests on the fundamental principles guiding the ethical deployment of AI. Now, the principles of safety and reliability stand as pillars, ensuring AI functions as intended while safeguarding stakeholders' welfare. Equality forms the core, we will all agree, demanding fair treatment for all the AI driven decisions. Inclusivity and non discrimination mandate that AI does not exacerbate societal divides but rather ensures opportunities for everyone, irrespective of our identity. Privacy and security remains paramount. Transparency, accountability and reinforcement of positive human values makes base of Indian government's AI strategy, advocating for openness in AI systems, system design, responsibility across stakeholders, and the promotion of harmony within our diverse communities. These principles collectively shape our vision for AI landscape that serves the nation while upholding ethical standards and human values. So let me now discuss in next few minutes our unique techno-legal AI framework. In line with our national vision, we aim to develop an AI framework that focuses not just on regulating AI, but also on creating regulations for AI, the AI for all. This will be done through our pioneering and unique techno-legal framework and amalgamation of public technology and public policy. Using a unique techno-legal approach, India has already proven its métier in creating strong and resilient platforms as digital public infrastructure. I am sure a lot of you know about it. It was also discussed extensively in the recently concluded G20. India is now creating a DPI for AI approach to develop a data collaboration ecosystem. Our focus is on data collaboration and not data sharing. Seemingly subtle but an important difference. This approach enables model training without relinquishing control of the data, ensuring privacy and security. This ecosystem follows the ADEPT's principle, namely accountability, democratizing data access, evolvability, privacy, transparency, and security. This approach will help us create AI ecosystem that will prevent monopolization, promote privacy, and prevent ethical biases all at once, while ensuring that India creates a vibrant data collaboration framework that helps create Indian models based on our own data sets to be used not just in India but also for other countries. Securing data sharing mechanisms, what it is. Another major concern is the potential of AI to erode individual agency and privacy. To ensure individual privacy and protect against potential manipulation, we need to establish clear global regulations and ethical guidelines for data collection and usage, giving individuals greater control over their personal information. Data empowerment and protection architecture, DEPA, I am sure you would have seen the earlier reports, draft released by Niti Aayog in August 2020 stands as a pivotal consent management tool promoting privacy and data control and sharing. DEPA's core ethos lies in empowering Indians by enabling them to leverage their data for personal advancement. Essentially, DEPA streamlines secure access to personal data, allowing seamless sharing with third-party entities, and its implementation, for example, in finance, falls under the purview of regulatory bodies like RBI, SEBI, IRDAI, and PFRDA, Ministry of Finance, with the expectation of evolving in tandem with the dynamic digital landscape. Digital Personal Data Protection DPDP Act 2023 of India aims to regulate handling digital personal data regardless of its original format, extending to both digitized and non-digitized origins is another spoke in the wheel to ensure data protection and enforcing accountability. The DPDP Act directly impacts entities managing citizens' data, including internet firms, mobile applications, and various businesses. Additionally, its significance extends to India's international trade negotiations as it aligns with global data protection standards, drawing inspiration from established models like the EU's GDPR and China's PIPL. To further solidify the efforts, in September this year, 2023, MITI took a significant step by establishing an advisory group on AI for India-specific regulatory AI framework. This group, which is chaired by PSA, carries a comprehensive mandate. As such, India has consistently engaged in the discourse pertaining to AI regulations. Myriad developments have taken place in the Indian AI landscape in recent times. However, the government has always been of the opinion of keeping a right balance between promoting technological innovation and having enabling regulatory mechanisms. India's vision is very clear. We aim to develop an AI framework that focuses not just on regulating AI, but on creating regulations for AI. The advisory group is mandated with advising the government on AI regulations on how to strike this delicate balance by developing necessary policy and regulations. The group is charged with drafting ethical guidelines contextualized for India, promoting the development of inclusive and trustworthy AI by defining India-specific parameters, devising testing and certification mechanism via technical tools and sandboxes, and ensuring regulatory oversight for sustainable AI-empowered technology development. Emphasizing the societal impact, the group will advise on infrastructure, R&D, deployment and ethical use of AI and machine learning technologies, while also shaping the creation of supportive techno-legal frameworks to enable India's readiness for AI advancements. In this rapidly evolving landscape of AI, the journey ahead, you will all agree, demands a collective commitment for all stakeholders. As we embrace the possibilities and navigate the challenges, our focus must remain unwavering on responsible innovation. It is not merely about what AI can do, but how can we steer its course to benefit society ethically and equitably. During recent G20 meetings in India, Government of India proposed to create a global AI framework for responsible AI. Government of India has shown its commitment for creating human-centric AI. This is possible if we collectively create standards, testing and certification mechanism, regulatory sandboxes, creating training curriculum on AI, auditing for making AI more trustworthy and responsible. I'll just finish by saying that let us forge a pathway where AI amplifies human potential, fosters inclusivity, and serves as a force multiplier for positive transformation and propels us towards a prosperous and harmonious world. India, needless to say again, is committed to foster an AI ecosystem that is inclusive, diverse, and uniquely serves the humanity. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sood, for highlighting the need for commitment to responsible AI and also the need for evaluating long-term risks of AI in the civilian context. You also brilliantly expanded on the techno-legal approach that India has adopted so far. Now, may I please invite Dr. Pandu Nayak to join us on stage and also deliver his keynote remarks. Dr. Pandu Nayak is currently a VP of Search at Google, working on various aspects of search quality. Prior to joining Google, he was the chief architect and then CTO of Stratify Inc., where he helped develop the very successful Stratify Legal Discovery Service. Previously, he was a research scientist at the NASA Research Center. While at NASA, he served as the deputy lead of the Remote Agent Project. Dr. Pandu received a BTech in Computer Science and Engineering from IIT Bombay and a PhD in Computer Science from Stanford University. May I request Dr. Pandu Nayak to please join us on stage and deliver his remarks.
Can we get the slides, please? Thank you for that, and it's great to be here in person with all of you. I'm Pandu Nayak, as she mentioned, and I'm a VP of Search at Google. Now, Google started with a question: how do you organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful? And so, as a result of that, my team and I, for about 20 years or so, have been focused on the problem of delivering the highest quality search results in Google search. Now, understanding language is key to being able to do this well. And so my team and I have been focused on solving problems of large-scale natural language understanding, which is a branch of artificial intelligence that's interested in seeing how computers can help computers can understand language the way you and I do. Now, of course, over the last several years, we've seen a dramatic acceleration in artificial intelligence technology. And with that acceleration have come lots of questions. People have lots of questions about what it is that artificial intelligence means in this way. So I thought it would be useful if I shared with you 3 questions that are top of mind for me. The first is, how has AI benefited the way we live, work, and learn right now? Right? Throughout history, in moments of great innovation, when there is great technological change, these have sort of had a profound influence on the course of human development. Right? Think about the wheel and the impact that it had on transportation and trade. Or think about the printing press, which led to widespread dissemination of knowledge. Or think about the steam engine, which led to to mechanized production and creation of all sorts of new industries. I think we're at a point in history with artificial intelligence which is of a similar magnitude. Now, when we think about artificial intelligence today, there's a lot of excitement about generative AI, right? And I'll be talking a lot more about it tomorrow. But we know that there is much more to artificial intelligence than simply chatbots and so on, right? So, and these other things about artificial intelligence have already started significantly affecting everything from cancer imaging to fraud detection. So let's look at some of these really amazing applications of artificial intelligence and see what's actually happening already. So let me start with AlphaFold. This is an AI system that Google DeepMind developed some years ago, which is able to construct the 3D structure of proteins, of about 200 million proteins. This is important because proteins are the building blocks of life, and their 3D structure is essential to how they function. And so as a result, AlphaFold is proving to accelerate research in biology and medicine, ranging from problems like creating new drugs for liver cancer, or creating effective vaccines for malaria, or finding ways to break down single-use plastics. So all kinds of amazing applications. Now, previously, it took many months, if not years, to develop the structure of a single protein, which means AlphaFold has effectively given us 400 million years of progress in a matter of weeks, which is pretty amazing. An interesting sidelight here is that we're only able to get the developments of AlphaFold because we were previously able to test out the ideas and develop the ideas in a safe context. Before AlphaFold, we had AlphaGo, which was a Go playing program that defeated the world Go champion back in 2016. Let me offer another example. Early warning systems are absolutely critical for us to be able to deal with many of the climate disasters like wildfires and floods. To help with this, researchers at Google developed an AI system that's able to predict water levels and use that to develop real-time forecasts for floods, for water levels, and be able to develop flood maps and depth charts, and then send out alerts to people. We launched this first in India and Bangladesh, and then further expanded it to areas encompassing places where some 460 million people live. Within this time, we've already sent more than 115 million flood alerts in collaboration with India's Central Water Commission. So these are pretty amazing impacts, and this is just sort of scratching the surface of all the things that are going on with AI today. And I'm confident that we're going to see lots more such amazing applications. Now, while it's exciting to talk about the beneficial uses of AI, and there are plenty of those, there are also concerns that AI will worsen various things like societal biases, for example, can get worsened by AI, or, for example, creating new problems like the spread of misinformation. So people are understandably concerned about what it is that AI might do in this way. And so that gets me to my second question. How can we mitigate the risks of AI while still driving innovation, right? In other words, how can we build AI responsibly? So let me start with a question that's top of mind for me working on Google search, and that is on information quality. People have a lot of questions about whether AI can make mistakes and can be used to generate and spread misinformation. To help with this problem, one of the many things we're doing is to develop tools to help people evaluate content that they find online. Okay? So a really great example of this is a tool that we recently launched in Google search called About This Image. What this tool does is, given an image, it'll tell you when and where that image was found, or similar images were originally found on the web, and where else that image is found on the web. Was it on a news site or a fact-checking site, or maybe on social media? And so effectively what it's doing for you is it's giving you a way to determine the authenticity of images. So a pretty amazing tool. Another great example is a recent piece of technology that Google DeepMind created called SynthID. SynthID is a tool that creates watermarks for AI-generated images. Synth ID watermarks are detectable even after you modify the image in various ways, such as adding a filter or changing colors or saving with lossy compression. In the future, we expect these kinds of watermarks to be available for creators and publishers so that they can add these watermarks to their AI-generated images, and we can display them as labels in Google search. A third example that is quite compelling is again something developed by our researchers called the Perspective API, which allows you to detect toxicity in online comments. The Perspective API is being used by Google's generative AI systems to reduce toxicity in the responses that they make, right? And we're sharing this more broadly with the industry. There's a standard based on the Perspective API that's now become an industry norm and is being used by Google, by Meta, by OpenAI, and so forth. The result of all of this is that it gives people a really great way to think about the context of the content they find online, which allows us to have a much more robust, reliable, and trustable information ecosystem. Right now, more generally, if I step back to a higher level, back in 2018, Google developed a set of AI principles to guide the development of all AI-powered experiences. These principles prompt important questions when you go into your AI-powered product development. For example, they ask, is the product socially beneficial? What did you do to build and test for safety? Or how did you incorporate privacy design principles into the design of your system, right? Now, in addition to giving us a whole set of questions on what you should do for your AI-powered products, these principles also tell you what you should not be doing. So, for example, Google became one of the first major companies to say that they would not develop a commercially available API for face recognition. We just felt that there were not enough safeguards in place to deploy such a technology commercially. Now, we stand at a pivotal moment in the development of artificial intelligence, right? And what that means is that the choices we make as governments, as industry, as civil society, the choices we make today are going to have a significant effect on the trajectory of how this technology develops. This is not something that a single nation, a single industry, or a single company can do by themselves. It's got to be something that we all have to come together and discuss and figure out what's the right way forward. And the right way forward really has to balance the incredible promise of AI with the risks and mitigating the risks. How do you maximize the benefits while minimizing the risks? I'm heartened by the developments that have taken place over the last year or so, where AI companies have been taking actionable steps to promote responsibility. And there's been a deep engagement between governments, industry, and civil society on thinking about the right ways to govern and regulate AI. And I think this is really, really important. And so that gets me to my third question. When it comes to AI, what more is possible? Just as the technology is propelling the industrial revolution, enabled humans to amplify their physical capabilities, AI is opening up new ways for us to think, to learn, to work, to connect, and so forth. So even as we think about mitigating the risks of AI, which was my second question, we can't lose sight of the incredible opportunities that are ahead for us with AI. We must focus our attention on what we'd like to achieve, not just on what we want to avoid. I honestly believe that AI can be a huge factor in addressing some of the biggest challenges of our time. One particular challenge, which is near and dear to my heart, is information access. Right? And even though we are 25 years into Google, I still feel that search and information access continues to be our big moonshot. Despite all the progress we've made, search is by no means a solved problem, and I'm very excited about what this new class of generative AI systems is going to bring in allowing us to really turbocharge search in the future and really allow information access for everyone in the most seamless possible way. So let me finish by asking one more question, right? If a decade from now, we want to have developed AI boldly and responsibly, what are the choices we being governments and industry and civil society, what are the choices we need to make today that allows that future to come true, the one that we want to see in 10 years, right? Because if we get this right, we can get the technology to help us solve some of our biggest challenges, make significant progress on fundamental science, and create enormous productivity in all sectors of the economy. That would be really exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nayak, for sharing with us how Google is advancing responsible AI through innovative tools and techniques. Now, may I request Dr. Sarayu Natarajan to join us on the stage, who will be moderating the panel discussion on this. She's the founder of APTI. I also request Professor Joanna Bryson to join us on the stage for the panel as well. Dr. Sarayu Natarajan is the founder of APTI Institute, which conducts foundational research on issues relating to tech and society with a focus on 3 thematic areas: future of workers, governance, and the data economy. She has a background in management consulting, venture investing, and program development and management, as well as academic research. Professor Joanna Bryson is a professor of ethics and technology at the Hertie School. Her research focuses on the impact of technology on human cooperation and AI ICT governance. From 2002 to 19, she was on the computer science faculty at the University of Bath. She has also been affiliated with the Department of Psychology at Harvard University, the Department of Anthropology at the University of Oxford, the School of Social Sciences at the University of Mayhem, and the Princeton Center for Information Technology Policy. Mr. Manu Chopra is working on tackling extreme poverty by providing dignified digital work to rural Indians. He is the co-founder and CEO of Karya, a transformative AI collective that is building pathways out of poverty for rural communities by employing them to build high-quality AI data sets. Ms. Madhulika Srikumar is a program and research lead for safety critical AI at Partnership on AI. In her work as a lawyer and policy professional, Madhulika has led global partnerships and engagement with governments, tech companies, law enforcement, and international policymakers, while undertaking research in digital rights and technology policy. Our last panelist is Professor David Leslie, who has been very patiently waiting for his turn to be introduced. He is working at the Alan Turing Institute, and he's also a professor at, I'll have to find.
Queen Mary, University of London.
I'm so sorry. Yes, found it. Professor David Leslie is the Director of Ethics and Responsible Innovation Research at the Alan Turing Institute and Professor of Ethics, Technology and Society at Queen Mary University of London. He previously taught at Princeton's University Center for Human Values, where he also participated in the UCHV's 2017-2018 research collaboration with Princeton Center for Information Technology Policy on technology ethics, political philosophy, and human values, ethical dilemmas in AI governance. Now I hand over the panel to Dr. Natarajan. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to a very interesting conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I audible? This is 2023. I feel like we should all start with that question, am I audible? But thank you very much, Antara, for that very kind introduction. It is my absolute privilege and pleasure to be moderating this conversation. I say this in every panel that I moderate, which is that it's a joy to be a moderator because I get to ask the difficult questions and sit back and learn from everybody else here. So thank you, and thank you to the audience for taking the time away from what I guess is the start of lunchtime. So thank you for being here. I'll jump straight into the panel, but just a few notes on how this might be structured. I'll ask all of the panelists one or maybe two questions, and then open it up to the floor for questions from the audience. Might I request the panelists to keep their intervention short so we can cover more? And might I request anybody who is asking questions to also keep their questions and observations short, so we have time to have more voices in the room articulate their thoughts. I'll start very quickly with you, Ms. Ramos. You spoke in your keynote extensively about both questions of access to technical systems and digital systems, particularly lenses of gender, location, geography, etc. And also some of the harmful consequences of AI that might have varying consequences depending on who you are. I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of your thoughts on this variation, particularly because AI has its emergence and is being developed in a variety of global contexts. So how might we think about this specificity a little bit more? And what is the role of having international norms and normative ideas conflict, or maybe they don't conflict, with some of the needs and exigencies of domestic contexts?
Well, I'm going to be very brief because I also want to learn from the other speakers, as you said, and I have already spoken my speech. I think that one of the elements that is very strategic in this conversation is what is the role of governments to help fill these gaps. Because at the end it has to do with computational capacities, it has to do with infrastructure, it has to do with access, it has to do with skills, it has to do, of course, with the global common goods in terms of the regulating the industry in a way that delivers. And I think this strategic reflection has been absent. It's great to hear how much India has been developing a very well-structured strategy for this. But I feel that we need to first have a clearer mapping of all these gaps, and second, see how we can build up from the strategic investments that governments can do for that purpose. And as I said in the recommendation on the ethics of AI of UNESCO, we have very specific policy issues. If you think about, for example, filling the gender gaps, first, you need to rule out how do we avoid all this stereotyping getting into the development of the technologies. Second, how do you ensure that you work to get more girls in ITC? What is the role? How do we entice this from happening? And I think there's a lot of room for higher level university education systems. And third, how do we get some affirmative action into the system also to open the room for women to participate? All of these things can be, of course, defined by governments, but then you also need to work with the private sector that also need to get into these kind of very concrete decisions to level the playing field. As I said, it's not in the vacuum, it's about the framework that we develop for these things to happen.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring the conversation to you, Dr. Sood. And to build on the talk that you just gave, where you highlighted some of the work that India is already doing, I'd like to take it back, maybe step out a little bit to ask about, you started with saying that there's a paradigm shift that generative AI brings, and the language of the paradigm shift is one that has deep legacy in the literature. But is generative AI an exceptional moment that necessitates exceptional views on it? What of AI regulation enablement can we learn from other digital technologies or other systems that we can learn from?
See, AI has been on the scene for a while. It's not something new that we discovered. But now the sensitivity it has come is more because in the last 1 or 2 years, what it has projected. And generative AI is one such aspect where you start getting worried when you look at the deep fakes and the impacts and so on. So that's why I call it a paradigm shift, because AI has been there in our cell phones for the last 7, 8, 10 years, right? So when it prompts you to even make the wrong spelling correction, all that we have been victim at one time or the other. So that's not the point. The point is now it is at a stage when it can cause some damages, and the people who will get damaged are not the ones who are responsible for this. So that is why I said that now is the time to really look at the regulations, which I also mentioned should be nimble. It should not be over subscribing to certain viewpoints and so on. And as Panduji said, companies are now coming forward to help self-regulation, which is a welcome sign. It should happen more, because in all of them everyone need not be a good player. There will be spoilers, and that is where the government's role totally caging it from all sides would be essential. And what you see in India, the DPI, Digital Public Infrastructure experience in the last 10 years, that has taught us a lot, because here the government and private players are very much involved. So the infrastructure was made by government, but all the investments and so on has come in a very transparent way from the private players. And that is what should happen for AI also. When we talk of DPI for AI, that's the whole idea, that you put the framework and see how it can enable the people who are putting their data, how they are getting empowered. It should not just be the victims. So I think in this sense, I think it's the right opportune moment for us to see that we take some steps and we don't feel sorry about it in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, sir, and also for that interesting thought that notions of sovereignty and governance don't just end at questions of harm, but also about enablement of innovation and business within the economy. Thank you for that. I'd like to take the conversation now to you, Dr. Nayak, and try and build on your talk, because one of the things I thought you said was that corporations and industry will need to play a significant role in mitigating some of the harms that might emerge in the context of AI. One is what role, and can you elaborate on the role a little bit more, but also speak a little bit about this question that comes up very often, which is the notion of conflict between innovation and profit, and regard for norms and principles with respect to safeguarding technologies.
I mean, when I think it is fair to say that industry plays a critical role in delivering innovation with responsibility. It's something that needs to be done in partnership with governments and civil society, of course, but I think it's absolutely critical that industry play a significant role. And certainly our perspective at Google has been that it is essential that when we bring this technology to bear, the motto that we have is bold but responsible, right? You need the innovation to fire up people's imagination, to deliver exciting products, but you need to do it responsibly. And that's why 5 years ago, well before all of this excitement, Google sort of in some ways anticipated this and put out those AI principles that I mentioned that really inform how we do product development in this way. So I think that is certainly our perspective here. You had a second part of the question, which I seem to...
The conflict between innovation and regard for norms and principles.
So,
Is there any?
so I actually don't think there is, right? I think good innovation, great innovation that has a lasting impact is one that is responsible. A lot of innovation seems very clever and everything in the short term if it is irresponsible, because then there's an inevitable back. And so if you want to have long-term impact on society and therefore as a result on your own company, then you have the innovation.
Risks and harms from AI technologies. I'd like to bring it to you, Manu. I know Karya does some exceptional work in thinking about questions of labor on the AI data supply chain. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about you, because I know this, and is that the labor part of the AI supply chain is very poorly understood, and even when it's understood, it is not really very well known. So I'd like to hear more about the kind of work that you do and what risks and harms around labor that exist in the context of AI.
Absolutely. So every year, tech companies, the sector spends billions of dollars collecting training data for AI models. Professor Sood talked about it in his keynote address. Unfortunately, today we have data workers in India, in the global south, whom can make as little as 30 cents an hour to build data sets that are worth hundreds of dollars for the same hour. AI today is an unjust labor market. You have an industry worth billions of dollars with data set worth hundreds of dollars, and people who build those data sets literally making pennies on the dollar, even though they do the majority of the work. There are estimates that suggest that there are over 5 million data workers in the world today. And Karya is the Sanskrit word for work that gives you dignity, work that gives you a sense of purpose. And it started with a mission to fix this broken labor market by creating a worker collective. And in the process of doing that, building new pathways out of poverty, right? So the question is, can we fix this? Can we create a just labor market in AI? And in the process of doing that, move lots of people out of poverty. And I think we started as a research project at Microsoft Research and did 4 years of research, and now work very closely with Google, and they've actually been incredible partners, work very closely with the government through the phenomenal Bhashni project, and they've been incredible partners. And we now see this huge momentum, and Karya is one of, I think, hundreds of initiatives across the world to build ethical AI, and in the definition of ethical AI, include the labor argument, right? So I think at Karya, we pay our workers 50 times the industry standard, wherever possible, which means when we don't open source the data sets, our workers actually own their data sets. So every single time the data set is shared or reshared, they get royalties on those payments. We take the vast majority of what our clients give us and give it to workers directly. We don't do work that hurts their mental well-being. We invest in them beyond just giving them work. And I think, believe very strongly that workers should receive fair wages for their work, right? If the data set is worth hundreds of dollars an hour, workers should make hundreds of dollars an hour, right? And I think that's the path we hope to be on. And in the process of doing that, the funny thing that happens is the AI models that you build end up being great, right? And this is not surprising, right? Like higher wages leads to better quality data sets, right? We know this, and that's why the tech sector has been such a big enabler of the kind of work that we do, because they are seeing large-scale improvement in AI model performance. We are able to work with a diverse set of population, as you talked about. So the work we do with Bhashni, the work we do with Google, the work we do with the Gates Foundation, with Microsoft, we're able to bring digital work to communities that haven't received that form of work before. And it's very heartening to see that. And I think that leads to AI models serving communities that they haven't served before. And I think it creates this incredible win-win situation where not only do we have better AI, we're also able to help the people who are building those AI and give them ownership over their data and give them royalties and stuff like that. So I think excited about the path ahead, and honestly just extremely grateful to see the amount of phenomenal work that is being led by the government and the private sector in India and globally today to push things like Karya. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and thanks for shedding light on what is, like we said, a critical but under-known aspect of the AI supply chain. I'm going to bring the conversation to you, Professor Bryson, and talk about the other aspect around data and safeguarding around data, which is questions of privacy, governance, and then surveillance. How might these be imagined? How do they present risks, and how are they instantiated in different contexts? Would love to hear, and I know you've written extensively about it, so would love to hear your perspective.
Yes, well, thanks very much. I'm really glad to get to talk about this topic. I've loved all the talks that have come before me, and I sort of agreed and disagreed with different parts. In particular, this thing about generative AI, that now suddenly AI can do things to us. Well, I've been through Trump and Brexit. And of course, we still don't know for sure how much of that is AI, which is exactly why the European Union has now made sure that we have more audit trails so we can double check. We need to know, we need to keep doing science and understand what is being done, and in particular, what is being done deliberately. So a lot of people, when they think about privacy, they think about, secret pictures. And of course, some people have pictures they don't want other people to see. But absolutely, as we've just heard, I really appreciated what the minister said. India and the EU have both recognized that basically our privacy is relevant to whether or not our people can be manipulated. It's like once you invented the airplane, you had to worry about airspace. Now that we've invented AI and more generally the internet, we have to think about who has access to our citizens and how are they being accessed and how are they being changed. But I don't only want to talk about this in terms of foreign governments. I mean, it is also, we don't know how much of this is being done deliberately, if people are deliberately manipulating, and how much of it, as I mentioned, might be emergent. So I remember when Facebook came through, I was teaching undergraduates computer science, and all of a sudden, people went from having kind of a broad distribution of understanding about how, say, something complicated like database technology works, to having usually most of them actually understanding correctly, and then sometimes, basically all of them understand correctly, and sometimes all of them understanding completely incorrectly. They came to a consensus through social media. So this is the kind of emergent thing that might be part of what we're seeing. And then another thing I've been worrying about very recently is, as we try to protect ourselves from hallucinations, really just, you will always have randomness when you ask for predictions of data. But then we put these things on called guardrails, and we require basically a lot of consensus before we release a result. Well, then you get, again, the bias towards the majority, right? So you start seeing, again, nobody means to make AI only produce normal results. So, now predominantly, actually, we could talk about predominantly white, male, Westerners or whatever, but I've heard recently that face recognition now works best on Indians, which I think shows some of the data stuff, who's doing the data work and what pictures they have at hand. But anyway, I don't want to go on too long, but I just want to say it's so important, these government initiatives. I was just in Singapore last week, and we were talking about what kind of data do we need to have access from corporations. We need to know when they make change to their algorithms so that then we can check and have causal records to see if there seems to be something going on. And we also have seen those kinds of audits already in the Digital Services Act and the AI Act now with the EU. So I think we have real hope to collaboratively construct a sustainable and safe future.
Thank you for that, Joanna. I'm going to bring this to you, Dr. Leslie. Not last this time, but ask now, we've mapped some of the harms or risks around labor, privacy and surveillance, but now start to unpack questions of bias a little bit more. Ms. Ramos spoke about it a little bit in her talk, and then it's been mentioned a couple of times as well, but would love to understand what that looks like. And again, going back to what I see as one of the purposes of this international platform is almost to unpack what that means in different contexts and how we might think about that. Over to you.
Sure, thank you. I'll just also just briefly mention that I think it's important in terms of sort of characterizing or classifying our moment, that when we think about the sort of generative AI revolution or whatever we want to call it, it's important to acknowledge that the moment isn't necessarily a moment specifically of scientific innovation or breakthrough. What we've experienced is an industrial revolution of the technology, a rapid commercialization of the technology. And what that's caused, I think, is a kind of immediate societal need to respond. And so that you have all of these international initiatives now to sort of, you know, in a sense, take control over a moment which feels like it's gotten out of hand, that you have these absolutely massive systems that are governed by a very small number of private tech companies affecting the global public interest, right? And so we're at this moment, I think, where we need to acknowledge that we are dealing with deep socioeconomic and societal issues that are emerging from industrial activity. I mean, that's the moment that we're in right now. So in terms of the question of bias, I think one important element of this that isn't often recognized is that the issues that arise across the sort of cascading elements of the innovation life cycle emerge from deep socio-historical patterns, right? So the world that we live in is obviously full of discrimination and bias. You have institutional discrimination, structural injustice, long-term patterns of coloniality and imperial legacy. You've got many aspects that create inequities within data distributions that then are ossified into the data sets that are used to train AI systems, right? And so we need to start always from understanding that the problems of bias that emerge in AI and data are our problems. They're problems of our history, of our culture, and of humanity. And so I think, you know, the evolution of thinking about bias in AI started with a very technocratic, technical approach. And I think we've come to a point where we can acknowledge that we need to look at the ecosystem. We need to understand the historical context in order to understand where bias comes from and how it kind of plays into the technology. That being said, I think bias also emerges not just from the patterns in society, but also the way we're represented in data, obviously, right? So, you know, there are only certain elements of global society that have been able to yield digital traces that are taken up and become part of the data sets that train AI. And those who have been connected, those who have been on the internet, those who are in the digital are those who are represented in data. And as I think Gabriela mentioned, and others too, that's obviously that's not the global majority, it's not most of the planet. And so when we understand the big picture of discrimination and bias, we have to address representation issues. One element of this, especially that becomes especially important in the age of large language models and generative AI, is we are experiencing now a real possibility of value lock-in, right? Where those cultures and societies that have been part of the digital archive are those societies that will be regenerated and reproduced through these generative systems, right? And so even in the image generators, or especially in the image generators, you see this. And so we need to be aware that data representation will actually ultimately not just play out in the performance of medical applications, other types of social and demographic applications. They will also play out in the cultural outcomes. So maybe I'll stop there, but there's much more to say. But
Thank you. Yes, of course.
Sorry to intervene, but there's something I skipped saying, which is characteristics of people that might cause problems, and either making them disappear physically or just making them invisible socially, which we're already seeing. So, thanks.
Well, thank you for that. And to Joanna's point, there is the landmark paper, Langdon Mirrors, its technology.
Way technical artifacts are imagined and even designed. I would recommend everybody read that paper. It's an old paper, but still relevant, I think. But I'd like to bring the conversation now to you, Madhulika. I would like to hear your thoughts specifically, and you've written extensively about this as well, on the unintended consequences and harms that result from AI. But I'd like to specifically dwell on some of the downstream harms, which is particularly in the context of our information society. What are the ways in which the availability of AI technology might increase or propagate these harms?
If folks are wondering what could the last speaker on a panel of 8 possibly have anything profound to add, I feel you. I think that's fair. But I do think I'm kind of speaking at the right point here, because we've heard all the other speakers here speak to different risks. And part of my work at the Partnership on AI is bringing together actors to be able to build coalitions to inform regulation and to inform the practices at companies. And one of the things that we have kind of built more recently is this notion of risk taxonomy for general purpose models. So we've heard Professor Sood kind of refer to a bunch of risks. We've heard Dr. David referred to a set of risks. So one, perhaps, lens through which we might want to think about it is, perhaps I'm complicating matters here, but along 4 axes. So the way I kind of capture it is it's known versus speculative risks, and model risks versus application risks, which you kind of refer to, the downstream harms. So, again, this is just a way to capture all of this, conversation that we've heard already, because it can seem awfully intimidating. You're like, surely there can't be a regulation that can address risk across the board. So one kind of lens of capturing it is thinking about model risks as risks that are inherent to the model. So that could be the bias in the training data, that could be the vulnerabilities of the model, that could be human-computer interaction harms when you interact with the model directly through like a chat interface. And these are risks that are probably most typically in the control of the model provider or the organization that trains the model. Application risks, which is kind of the other end of the spectrum, can be understood as risks that arise when one of these general purpose models are integrated in an existing product or service, or they're kind of trained upon. And those risks could be unintended, could be risks from incorrect or biased outputs, or could be malicious uses by adversarial actors. So that's kind of the top 2 quadrants that I'm playing out here. I think folks wish that I had done the keynote, perhaps could use a slide here. The top the top and bottom axis is the known and speculative risks, right? So we hear a lot of risks getting conflated at once because we are thinking about models as we now know them, and we are also thinking about far more advanced capabilities, and that kind of creates some sort of tension in the discourse because it's hard to pass through. So known risks would be risks that are well understood, they're quantifiable, we've observed it repeatedly, and speculative risks are risks perhaps that are more hypothetical, that could arise from complex interactions that we haven't really fully understood yet. So if you take that chart that I'm kind of describing and laying out to you, really you should think of it as a moving target. As these capabilities advance a little more, a lot of what we think is speculative could perhaps become a bit more known. So one of the speculative risks that gets a lot of airtime is, aiding malicious activities or like instructions for malicious activities. I think bioweapon is the example that keeps coming up. But some of the other risks are fairly known, like treatment of data enrichment workers that Manu spoke to here. So part of it is just thinking about this as some sort of a matrix or framework, because anyone who tells you they've got it figured out, I wouldn't believe them, honestly, because it's such a fast-moving field. And thinking about it as a multidimensional landscape of risks that can stand to change over time, that helps us best prioritize risks that we already witness, and also think about signals of risks that we're anticipating, because we don't want the speculative or hypothetical risks to come true either. So that's kind of the task at hand, which I don't envy any of us for having to tackle at this point.
Thank you very much for that, Madhulika. I realize we have 20 minutes more, or closer to 15, and I was thinking we could take I, of course, have very many more questions, but I would also like the audience to engage on this. So if we can take 2 or 3 questions, and then I will direct them to the speakers.
But this is probably one of the most enlightening conversation in the entire conference and extremely relevant. So thank you. And you covered in the keynote speaks very well. And some of the questions that I had coming up, you kept asking and that got answered. So I'll leave at one thing about transparency, because algorithms are opaque and we don't quite know how to make actors accountable. It's a hard, that's just one piece of it. And the other piece I'm going to let other people speak.
Yes, we'll take a couple more and then bring them all together. The gentleman over there.
Shall I speak now or you answer before? Yes. So I'm from the French media, and I would ask your opinion on a concrete example, maybe more for Mr. Sood, but everyone can answer. Here in India, in a few months, 1 billion person will get to vote for the next prime minister. So this is just the biggest election in the history of mankind. So I know that the Indian government is working on guidelines, soon regulation, but we are already saw in the last legislative election voice cloning, deep fakes going massive, and it will be for sure worse in a few months. So my question is simple: are we really ready to face the maturity of this technology on such a huge election?
Thank you for that. Next question.
A very pleasant afternoon to all of you. I come before you as a curious student. I study here in the Ramjas College, University of Delhi. And my question to all of the delegates sitting here is, as youth, the next 5 years are to be very crucial because that decide where AI takes us, not where we take AI. Because AI is one of the most powerful tools. We have come a long way from 2 + 2 being 4 to all the questions that are possible to ask. I am sure John McCarthy and Alan Turing would be clapping in their graves for seeing where AI is today. So my question is that there are risks, there are challenges, and the more we come to the modern society of technology, they are going to increase in their intensity. New platforms such as Gemini and other AIs have been coming through Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI. Where do we lie as youth? What are the risks that we can avoid that you are already aware of and have not been brought out to us in the open? Thank you.
One more question. The gentleman here, I think, has been asking for a while, up in front. The gentleman here, please, if I may. Please let her ask. Please stand up.
I'm Sanchayata, representing Ramjas College. So my question revolves around the technical interventions of AI in the improvement of translation. Since we know that there's still a considerable population of the society who does not prefer English as the first language, but rather prefer their vernacular languages and mother tongue when it comes to exchange of information. And at present, we see that there are a lot of inaccuracies and discrepancies in translation. Moreover, I would like to add, since our Prime Minister also mentioned in his speech that we are supposed to make some interventions in translating the manuscripts, which are not only written in Sanskrit, but also in the various ancient manuscripts like the Thai language or the Bodo language or Ahom language. So I was just asking ki, how are we going to overcome these discrepancies and inaccuracy when it comes to translations through AI?
Thank you for that. The gentleman in front, and then we will take it to the panel, please. Thank you.
I'm Deepak Maheshwari, a senior visiting fellow with the Career think tank, and earlier been in the tech industry. I've also been associated with the IEEE's ethically aligned design for more than a decade now. So my question is very specific to in terms of the role of the government. Governments are not only setting the rules for everybody, but governments are also one of the largest users of AI and developers also, for example, including in India as well as in many other places. So what is it that the government should be doing differently as a role model in terms of setting as a good example? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to use my moderator privileges and direct the questions a little bit. The question around the role of the state, Ms. Ramos, you brought it up, but I'd like to hear both yours and Dr. Sood's views on it. And Dr. Sood, if you could also tackle the question on the readiness as a legal and technical system for us to face some of the challenges posed by deepfake technology and other AI.
Thank you so much. I give it back to you. No, well, let me just be very clear. I think that this can take us to the philosophical debates of Hobbes in terms of the social contract and who is in charge of the social contract. And at the end, the entity that is in charge of the rule of law is governments. And I think that this is what is at stake here. How do we ensure that the rule of law is observed online? And this is linked to all of the questions, because when you talk about transparency, we're not going to be chasing every single development in the AI world to make sure that it's transparent. But if there is harm, of course, we need to go back and roll back and see why harm happened. And then if there is harm, there should be consequences. So I think this is the core issue in terms of what the role of governments here is. Not easy, because at the end, it's very difficult to assign responsibility and accountability in the world of AI when you have so many layers of people that are using these developments and reusing them and developing more. But at the end, I think that we need to have a people-centered approach, in the sense that we need to understand how harm happens, what is the taxonomy of risk and harms, and how they can be approached with institutional interventions. And for this, I would say that the most important task that governments have at hand is to prepare themselves better, to understand the technologies, to understand the regulatory implications, the policy implications. We all talk about sandboxes and to really fine-tune these interventions. But I think that there is a very, very deep need for governments to invest in themselves for the regulatory purposes, but also for getting the case studies of how these things happen. But there is also something else. In my ideal world, governments should develop their own technologies. Because at the end, if you are going to have the application of these technologies to help manage better big systems, there are no larger systems, and more in India, than the health system, than the education system, than the housing, than the application of welfare. All of these systems will benefit massively for applying artificial intelligence. If I was a government, I will not buy those platforms in the market. And therefore, we really need to invest in the skills of the governments, and then the governments need to invest in the skills of the population, the schools, all of the other things, because we are providers. So the role is way beyond this question of regulating or not regulating. Is providing with the framework where these things are really done in the safe space and are directed towards the public good.
Thank you for that. I think it also speaks to Professor Leslie's point around this particular moment in history and why the state is so important. But over to you, Dr. Sood, to also answer the tricky question of are we ready to deal with this?
Tough question, whether the deep fakes will not occur in the next election. That's the question you asked. See, the intent of the government is extremely clear that this should not happen. Now you have to be one step ahead of the people who will do it. So it's not something which can be said for certainty, but the fact that intent is very clear and efforts are on. I'm quite, I don't have deep information that this has been done, so the elections will not be, I don't have that. So I'm saying, knowing our systems working in the government, I know that this is a point of big concern to all the leaders, and guidelines are getting in place, but we are learning also from experience as we go along. This is not something which has like a matured threat. This threat is also evolving. So answer is efforts are on, and if you look at the previous elections, I think we did reasonably well than many other democracies where these things had minimal effect. Though there were some charges and counter charges, but the effect was very minimal. So I don't see any reason that it will also not happen here. Regarding this other question on the translation of text, the student asked a very important question. And as you already know, that there are two efforts which are already on. One is called the Bhashani project by MIT, and the second one is by AICTE, All India Council of Technical. Platform is also available, which gives you the text and the whole thing, including the figures and so on. I have used it, and but right now it is for about 6 languages. But as the time goes on, this will also increase. So translation of the known languages is happening, English to Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, all that. But the one which you said, which Prime Minister also said, the ancient languages, which was mentioned by her, that has yet to happen. So I'm saying it is really works in the making, and translation of text is a very important application and already happening.
No, thank you. And some very interesting applications being built on Bhashani as well.
Exactly.
With the few languages that are already available.
Exactly.
I'd like to take the questions on transparency. I'll bring it to you, Joanna, in a moment. But I'd like to take the questions on transparency and accountability to you, Dr. Leslie, and you, Madhulika. If you'd like to take those questions, and then I'll bring it to you.
Right. So on the problem of transparency, so explainable AI is a hard problem, especially for these complex systems like generative AI. And I think that there's the science is in full force trying to sort of get at some of those issues. However, there are, I think, sort of unbreachable barriers there. That being said, we have to understand transparency not just in terms of outcome or output transparency, model transparency, but also transparency in terms of the processes behind the design, development, and deployment of the systems, right? So assuring that there are ex-ante governance measures that establish end-to-end accountability vis-a-vis the responsible character of the actions being taken. So here we can think of, for instance, ex-ante impact assessment. We have UNESCO's ethical impact assessment. We have the Council of Europe's HUDARIA, Human Rights, Democracy, and Rule of Law impact assessment. We have these governance mechanisms that are emerging as transparency enabling tools. Then we can think across the design, development, deployment lifecycle. There's bias self-assessment and risk management frameworks. There's safety and performance self-assessment and risk management frameworks. There's various other ways to document and evidence that responsible actions are being taken. And all of those elements, I think, are part of the transparency portfolio. And moving forward, we need to ensure that there are, I think, codified requirements that put industry and other organizations, public sector bodies, on the hook to be sufficiently transparent about all of those processes.
Thank you for that, Madhulika.
Should I jump in? Yeah.
Yes, please.
In the spirit of transparency, I think one of the other things, if we had a checklist, is transparency of usage, right? So once you put the model out in the world, where is it being used, who's fine-tuning it, and for what? And again, there's a diversity of deployment scenarios there. If you're an open source provider, it's that much harder to track how your model is being used because it has high traction. So finding ways to create practices around transparency in those cases is really important. And I feel like we're kind of already seeing it, but there's a lot of chatter around disclosure and disclosure regimes, like what we'd want industry organizations who develop these models and deploy it, what's the transparency that they owe to us, and what's the kind of documentation best practices they should follow. And perhaps a morbid phrase, but I think helpful is this notion of death by documentation, right? Like there can be a deluge of documentation about what goes into the model, what comes out of it, who's using it, and then there are real questions about, to what end and to what purpose it's being, put to. One of the disclosure regimes that's gotten a lot of traction recently is this notion of licensing for, larger model providers, who kind of train really large and general systems. And again, you could ask them for documentation before they train their systems. But once the model is out in the world, let's say it's, an open source frontier release, someone can fine tune it. So again, the question really is how do we achieve our regulatory goals? I think what we're trying to fix for here is the inherent information, asymmetry. It's so hard to understand these systems and their risks, but we should be careful about imposing, obligations that don't get us any closer to understand how these systems truly work. And I imagine this year and the next is really going to be a clincher to help us figure out what's really meaningful for the average user and for policymakers to be able to govern this technology, which is clearly transformative.
Thank you, Joanna. And then I'll bring it to you, Manu.
So, I'm mostly going to be also talking about transparency, but I want to talk a little bit about what the EU has already done with respect to this. So, I very much in agreement with the second half of what Professor Leslie said. The big thing I think that the AI Act has done has brought ordinary product law into software. And for whatever reason, I know the reasons. People have claimed that software is a service, it's not a product. Now, actually, some people think all services are also products. But let me tell you why product law is a good idea. The point of product law is that the sector establishes what is good practice, what is due diligence. And so it's not that the government suddenly has to become an expert in AI. And incidentally, when you go in and you audit a bank, you don't check what the neurons are in everybody's head about whether the synapses are connected correctly. No. You say, did the bank follow the kinds of process, like the kind of internal auditing or whatever, that should have protected it? If they followed the right process, then they don't have the same liability as if they did something wrong. Okay? Now, this gets us over this problem of death by documentation. If you think, and unfortunately I've seen some companies with a lot of money saying, oh, we've done this many millions of tests or whatever, that's not what matters. What matters is the outputs, right? So if what you need to do is to be able to defend yourself in a court of law, then you can estimate how much do you want to put into transparency because maybe your little gadget is not going to cause trouble, but also you can figure out your transparent has to be apparent. It has to be something people can understand. It should be the same thing your own developers are using to understand their system and improve it. Is then you expose that to trusted government auditors, not necessarily open sourcing to the whole world, but people can go back in or to the legal system. That we will put these processes in place. So this is what the EU has basically been doing. We're just trying to bring the software industry into being a mature sector, basically.
Well, thank you for that. I think the notion of transparency is one of those complicated ones where it's not just about somebody choosing to be transparent, but the levels of readiness within a system to be able to engage with that transparency, whether it's in terms of capacities, technical capacities, or even cognitive capacities. Like, do you have the time to go through, to the point that Madhulika made? But I'll bring it to you, Manu, hopefully to close this out because we're at time and...
Absolutely. I just wanted to answer the translation question. And I think that, in late 1990s, Windsurf wrote a paper titled The End of Information Asymmetry, right? This idea being that the internet was going to unleash this golden age and there will be no concept of information asymmetry. And Windsurf is a personal hero, but that did not happen, right? Information asymmetry is still a major problem, right? In the villages we work in, just because people don't speak English, they don't have access to information. Right, and I think in 2023, information asymmetry still being problem is a ridiculous statement, right? So I think the translation services that the government is working on with Bhashani, which now exist in so many languages, or what Google's doing with Vani, it's so fundamental, right? Because I think the last big transformative technology was the internet, and that was 30 years ago. And even today, 3 billion people in the world have no access to the internet, right? Like no access to the internet. And if you look at intermittent access to the internet, 70% of the world today still has intermittent access to the internet. We cannot afford to make that same mistake with AI, which is why I think this conversation and what everyone on the panel is doing is so important, and just wanted to say that, yeah.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
I'm sorry, but we didn't answer the question of youth. And I
yes,
think
of
that's
course.
that's
Yes.
super important because just very fast, let me tell you, I'm actually, my sector is in charge of the coordination with the youth groups in UNESCO, and what the youth have told us is that they're very worried about the behavioral impact, psychological impact of the overuse of these technologies by the youth cohorts. So I think it's very important that the young people, are native IT speakers, but also carry this impact in terms of them being in the development stage. And I think it's very important that there is more awareness of these things, there is more research, that we don't only get it into the economics or the industrial thinking, but the anthropological impact, the sociological impact, psychological impact, and this requires much more research. But for young people also requires more awareness and digital literacy. This is really important. I will say girls need to go to IT. That's a question. And final point, we were talking about deep fakes and the manipulation and what is coming in democracy. We are going to be working on neurotechnology, because without the neural data, without the knowledge of who is the person behind, what triggers them, what are their emotions, and these things are happening, we will not be able to deal with the targeting, profiling, and then massive influencing of people's behavior because they know you. So it's very important that we also think on these converging technologies, and we will be doing an ethics of neurotechnology at UNESCO too.
Thank you very much for that. If I may take the liberty to summarize a couple of points, it seems that we're all in agreement that there is a paradigm shift that AI brings about, particularly generative AI, in the ways that it impacts society, but also for the fact that it has emerged in a very peculiar socio-political economic moment. We also think that there are questions of harm that lie across the AI value chain, whether it's questions around the way in which labor is imagined, governed, supported, and labor rights are thought of, the way in which questions of privacy and surveillance are engaged with, the way in which questions of model and model bias, and then some of the downstream consequences are imagined. There is some deep work that we need to do. And last, we do think that there is the role that transparency can play, but equally important, as much as frameworks are important, it's also useful and meaningful to think about the ways in which we as a society can come together to think about some of the harms around AI. I wish we had more time. but we'll have to draw this to a close. This has been a wonderful experience having this conversation, and I wish it could go on for, I don't know, much longer. But thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for the panel.